Have you ever wondered whether the thing most likely to trigger a heart attack is something dramatic, rare, and obvious, or something so common, so normal, so woven into everyday life that millions of people are living with it right now and barely thinking about it? Because when most people imagine what causes a heart attack, they imagine the cinematic version, a sudden collapse, a shocking moment, a catastrophe that comes out of nowhere. But in real life, heart attacks usually do not begin as sudden events. They begin as slow events. They begin quietly. They begin with changes happening inside blood vessels year after year, often with no pain, no warning, and no sign dramatic enough to force someone to pay attention. And the thing I want to focus on today is one of the most common drivers of that process, one of the most overlooked, one of the most dangerous, specifically because it can be doing damage for years before a person feels anything at all. I'm talking about high blood pressure, not the dramatic spike you get when you're startled, not the temporary rise when you sprint up the stairs. I mean chronically elevated blood pressure, the kind that stays high, the kind that quietly presses against your artery walls day after day, month after month, year after year. And I know that might sound almost too ordinary to be the answer. High blood pressure doesn't sound cinematic enough. It doesn't sound like the villain people expect. It sounds boring, clinical, administrative, like a number your doctor mentions and you promise yourself you'll deal with later. But the biology of what that number is actually doing inside your body is not boring at all. It is one of the clearest examples in medicine of how something silent can become something catastrophic. So what I want to do today is build this from the ground up. I want to walk you through what blood pressure actually is, why the heart and arteries can tolerate only so much force for so long, how that pressure changes the structure of your blood vessels, how those changes turn into plaque, how plaque turns into blockage, and why so many heart attacks are not really sudden at all, but the final visible moment of a process that's been unfolding in silence for years. And once you understand that mechanism, once you really see it, the warning in this video's title is going to feel less like a slogan and more like something painfully obvious. Because the truth is, many heart attacks are not caused by one dramatic bad day. They are caused by pressure, literal pressure. Let's start with the basics because I think this matters more than people realize. Every time your heart beats, it pushes blood into a vast network of arteries that carry oxygen and nutrients throughout your body. That pushing force is your blood pressure. It is the pressure of moving blood against the walls of your arteries. And under normal conditions, that pressure is not a problem. It is life. You need it. Without pressure, blood doesn't move. Without movement, tissues don't get oxygen. Without oxygen, cells die. Pressure is essential. But there is a difference between normal force and excessive force. There is a difference between water moving through a pipe and water hammering that pipe over and over again at levels the system was never meant to endure indefinitely. That is what chronic high blood pressure is. It is not just a number on a machine. It is a mechanical stress problem. It is your circulatory system living under more force than it was designed to handle continuously. Now, the reason that matters so much is that blood vessels are not inert tubes. They are living tissue. They are dynamic, responsive, biologically active structures lined by a delicate inner layer of cells called the endothelium. That endothelial layer is astonishingly important. It helps regulate blood flow. It signals when vessels should relax or constrict. It helps manage clotting. It acts as a kind of intelligent interface between the bloodstream and the artery wall. But when blood pressure stays elevated for too long, that inner lining starts taking damage. Not necessarily damage you can feel, not damage that announces itself dramatically, but tiny insults, repeated stress, repeated strain, repeated friction. And this is where the story changes from "I have a blood pressure issue" to "I may be setting up the conditions for a future heart attack." Because once the artery wall is damaged, the body responds the way it always responds to injury. It tries to repair it. Inflammatory cells arrive, chemical signals are released, cholesterol particles and cellular debris begin to collect in those vulnerable areas. White blood cells move in and start consuming some of that material. Over time, those repair attempts stop looking like repair and start looking like buildup. That buildup is plaque. This is the beginning of atherosclerosis. And I really want to pause here because this is one of the most misunderstood parts of the whole conversation. People often talk about plaque as if it's just fat passively sitting in an artery like grease in a kitchen drain. That picture is too simple. Plaque is not just random gunk, it is the product of injury, inflammation, lipid accumulation, immune response, and time. It is a biological scar of sorts, a record of damage. So when high blood pressure is present for years, it does two dangerous things at the same time. First, it directly increases the force pressing on artery walls. Second, it helps create the conditions under which plaque is more likely to form and progress. That means high blood pressure is not just making the heart work harder, it is also helping reshape the arteries themselves. And once that process begins, the consequences can stay hidden for a long time. That is one of the most deceptive things about high blood pressure. It usually doesn't hurt. Most people do not feel their arteries becoming less elastic. They do not feel microscopic injury to vessel walls. They do not feel plaque quietly developing. They do not feel coronary blood flow narrowing by degrees. And because they don't feel it, the brain assumes nothing urgent is happening. No pain means no problem. But biology does not work that way. Your arteries do not care whether the damage feels dramatic enough to get your attention. The damage continues anyway. This is why high blood pressure is so often called a silent condition, not because it is harmless, exactly the opposite. It is called silent because it can be seriously harmful while remaining subjectively invisible. Think about how dangerous that combination is. Something common, something measurable, something treatable, something that often causes no symptoms. That is almost the perfect setup for neglect. And that neglect matters because the heart itself is also paying a price the entire time. When blood pressure is high, your heart has to pump against greater resistance. Every beat becomes more demanding. Every contraction requires more effort to push blood into a system that is already pushing back harder than it should. At first, the body compensates. The heart muscle thickens, especially the left ventricle, the chamber that does the heavy lifting of sending oxygenated blood out to the body. On the surface, that may sound adaptive, and in the short term it is. A stronger muscle handling a harder job, but there's a cost. Thicker heart muscle can become stiffer. A stiffer heart does not relax as well between beats. Filling becomes less efficient. Oxygen demand rises. Electrical stability can change. Over time, the adaptation starts turning into dysfunction. So now high blood pressure is doing damage on both sides of the equation. It is wearing down the blood vessels, and it is overworking the pump. That alone would be serious enough. But the part that most closely connects to heart attacks is what happens inside the coronary arteries, the arteries that feed the heart muscle itself. These vessels are not huge. They are critically important, but they are not large highways with endless room to spare. Even modest narrowing over time can matter, especially when the heart is working harder and needs more oxygen. As plaque builds in these arteries, blood flow can become limited. Sometimes that causes angina, chest discomfort during exertion because the heart is asking for more oxygen than narrowed arteries can deliver, but not always. And this is important. Not every dangerous plaque causes obvious symptoms before a heart attack. Some plaques narrow the artery gradually and create warning signs. Others are less obstructive but more unstable. And that instability is where the real danger comes in, because many heart attacks do not happen simply because an artery slowly narrowed until it closed like a clogged drain. Many happen because a plaque becomes vulnerable, ruptures, and triggers a clot. That moment is everything. A plaque sitting in the wall of an artery may have a fibrous cap over it. If that cap breaks open, the inside contents of the plaque are suddenly exposed to the bloodstream, and the body interprets that as damage requiring an emergency clotting response. Platelets rush in. Clotting factors activate. A blood clot begins to form right there in the coronary artery. And if that clot becomes large enough, it can partially or completely block blood flow to part of the heart muscle. Now you no longer have a slow, silent process. Now you have an acute event. Now heart muscle is being starved of oxygen. Now minutes matter. Now cells begin to die. That is a heart attack. And what I want you to notice is how different that actual sequence is from the way people casually talk about heart attacks. The heart attack is not the beginning of the story. It is the end of a much longer one. The rupture is sudden. The biology behind the rupture often isn't. Years of elevated pressure, years of arterial injury, years of plaque development, years of silent remodeling, and then one day, one unstable moment, one clot, one blocked artery, one catastrophe that feels to the person experiencing it like it came out of nowhere. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a process. Now, I want to make something very clear here because precision matters. High blood pressure is not the only cause of heart attacks. Smoking matters. Diabetes matters. Cholesterol matters. Chronic inflammation matters. Genetics matter. Physical inactivity matters. Abdominal obesity matters. Diet matters. Sleep matters. In some cases, artery spasm, spontaneous coronary artery dissection, embolism, or other less typical mechanisms can be involved. So this is not a simplistic claim that every heart attack can be blamed on one thing. That would be bad science. But high blood pressure is one of the major modifiable risks precisely because it amplifies so many of the other problems. It damages arteries. It accelerates atherosclerosis. It makes the heart work harder. It interacts with other metabolic risk factors in ways that are deeply unfavorable. And what makes it especially dangerous is how ordinary it feels. Nobody panics over high blood pressure the way they panic over chest pain. They should not panic, but they should respect it. Those are very different things. Panic is not useful. Respect is. Because when you respect a risk factor, you stop treating it like paperwork. You stop thinking of it as just a number someone mentions during a routine appointment. You start seeing it for what it is, a long-term force acting on one of the most important systems in your body. There's another part of this that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets, and that is the timing problem. Your cardiovascular system is not static across the day. Blood pressure follows rhythms, hormones change, nervous system activity changes. The body does not run at exactly the same state at 3 a.m., 8 a.m., and 9 p.m. In the morning, especially after waking, blood pressure tends to rise. Heart rate rises. Stress hormones rise. Your body is shifting from sleep physiology into waking physiology. You are mobilizing. For a healthy system, that is normal. But if someone already has chronically elevated blood pressure, stiffened arteries, unstable plaque, or advanced coronary disease, that morning surge can become part of the risk landscape. Again, that doesn't mean mornings are dangerous in some mystical sense. It means cardiovascular stress is not evenly distributed across time, and biology has rhythms that matter. That's one reason why I feel okay most of the time, is such a weak defense against cardiovascular risk. Most of the damaging processes involved here are not experiences, they are mechanisms. A person can feel fine and still have rising pressure, progressive arterial stiffness, worsening endothelial dysfunction, and coronary plaque becoming more vulnerable beneath the surface. This is also why waiting for symptoms is such a poor strategy. Symptoms are often late, sometimes very late. And this brings me to one of the most frustrating parts of the whole topic. People assume that if high blood pressure were truly dangerous, the body would make sure they felt it clearly. But the body does not always work that way. High blood pressure can damage the heart, the brain, the kidneys, the eyes, and the blood vessels while staying mostly silent. In some people, severe blood pressure elevations can cause headaches, blurred vision, chest pain, or other symptoms, yes. But for many people, the usual pattern is not obvious warning. The usual pattern is quiet progression. That means measurement matters, not intuition, not guesswork, not, I can tell when my pressure is high. Blood pressure is one of those areas where subjective confidence can be wildly misleading. You do not reliably feel 132/84. You do not reliably feel 146/92. You do not reliably feel the difference between controlled and uncontrolled hypertension. You measure it. That is how you know. And I think this is where the topic becomes bigger than just heart attacks. Because once you understand how high blood pressure behaves, you start seeing how many people are caught in the same trap. They are busy, they are functioning, they are not in obvious distress, so the risk gets downgraded psychologically. They tell themselves they'll address it after a stressful month, after a move, after the holidays, after this work project, after things calm down. But blood vessels do not pause their biology while your schedule is crowded. Damage continues on calendar time, not on intention. And one of the most important public health truths in cardiovascular medicine is that lowering blood pressure matters even by amounts people tend to dismiss as small. We are not talking about magic. We are talking about risk moving in response to pressure moving. That is what the research keeps showing over and over again. When systolic blood pressure comes down, cardiovascular risk comes down. That is not motivational language. That is physiology, which means this is one of those areas where